Hi, this is Allan McKay, and welcome to the second and final part of the Firehouse video series. The last video we focused entirely on creating realistic fire, whereas this video we take our setup we created for the fire and we build an intricate system around it to allow us to literally paint where we want the fire to be created, as well as utilize helpers to choreograph the animation and timing to get the fire to creep through the shot, matching our timing that we set up. Lastly, we use particles to visualize our effect long before we run any fire simulations, which is obviously the longer part of the process, which we want to avoid until we've entirely locked down the timing and placement of our fire. This approach is going to work great to allow us to get accurate results when setting up our fire effect, without needing to run sims, as well as in the first place having total control over how we create our fire by intuitively painting our fire where it's needed. So let's dive in. Alright, so far what we got is, we just had this kind of puddle of fire burning on the spot. And like I said, that wasn't my main focus here. I didn't want to just do, I wanted to kind of quickly get fire set up in our shot so we can focus on the more intricate part here, which is getting it to burn and continue to burn over a larger area. So what I'm going to do next is I basically want to break this up. There's a few things I want to do, but first of all, let's just focus on one section and set up our workflow. So in this case, I'm going to get my file and apply an edit poly because I can undo that. And let me just select everything except for the stairs, like that. Just something to start with, okay? And then I'll put like a delete mesh and a poly select just to forget everything. Alright, now let me just hide anything else I haven't seen. So I've just got this here. This is just my testing bed to transfer what we set up here over onto this staircase, just as something that's a bit more applicable to what we're doing. So I don't need to worry about Fume at this point because we've set that up. And now it's more about the distribution. Okay, this is pretty simple. All I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a Vertex Paint on here for a start. And let me just bucket this. Let me display bucket the, paint bucket the black on there. And then let's just go in here. And I can start to paint what I want. So let's just say 10, I'm going to say 25% opacity, and I want to start painting specifically what I want. Now, one of the first things we're going to notice is like, okay, cool, I see what Alan's doing. The paint right now, really low poly, we don't have much to play with. Okay, so I'm going to tessellate this, set tension to 0, keep it as poly, sorry, as quads, and let's just bring up the tessellation where we've got a lot to play with here, okay? And now let's drop a Vertex Paint on paint bucket. Let me do that again. Make sure opacity is at 100%. All right, now 25 white. And now we can go to town painting exactly where I want fire to spread. Okay, so for instance, you know, I don't want the fire specifically to burn in like a linear motion. So I might want it to spread a little bit up here, but then that's as far as it gets. But then over here, it spreads up more and begins to creep along. Like, I'm not too concerned right now. We're just setting up the workflow, and then we'll actually do this for realsies in a moment, okay? And but the whole idea is this way I'm actually kind of getting more of a creeping pattern. Now obviously as it begins to burn, I might want to actually burn up the wall in certain areas, so this way I can get a bit more of an organic shape. And because I got the opacity low, even though this is going to transfer over the particles, but you know what I'm really kind of getting out of this is the fact that the concentration is going to be a bit different. And you could technically use shaders to drive all of this that are based on objects, but in general, this is more what I want to go for. It's a little bit denser than I would actually go for, but you can the other way around. Basically you could kind of bring the stuff back a little bit if you wanted to. But in general, that's kind of what I'm going for here, okay? And by doing that, and by the way that we set this up, we've got a lot of control over it. And so with this, all I literally did is I put in Vertex Color, display unshaded, and initially made it black, then painted in the whites. And at that point, I can go in here. I mean, if I wanted to, I could say emit this. We've got it emitting from the map. We need to set up what we're emitting from, but if we go in here now, I don't care about keeping this texture map, so I'm going to kill it. The main thing is I'm going to put in a vertex color, okay, and just assign this to our object. I don't need to worry about map channel or any of that stuff there. It's just a vertex color, and that's going to give us this. And we can kill this object. We don't need it. So by doing that, now we get the particles emitting exactly how we set up. And the cool thing is, it just means that we don't need to worry about what the particles are doing. At the motion, everything we set up before, we look dev'd it all, and now, like I said, we're just controlling the distribution. So that's important to me because it just means that I don't need to ever think about the fire again. I'm pretty confident the fire is always going to look good, and all I need to worry about is like, okay, what's the timing, where is it going to go, that sort of thing. Now the next thing is it's all turning on at once. So if this was to light up, the whole thing's going to light up. So next thing I want to do, and again, I think it's such a critical part of this, is to, let me turn my particle system off for a moment. Basically, I'm going to create a sphere. And we could use multiple. We can get a lot more intricate with this, or specific with this, but I'm going to animate the sphere. Again, I'm only going to do like 250 frames. This is not going to be like look spectacular, but it's going to be, it's just going to get my point across. So I could animate 50. Usually I do this over 1,000 frames, but I'm going to show my trajectory. I forget how you do that. It's been about 10 years, but I believe it's in here. Yeah. So I've just always had a hotkey since like max 1. And I can just see what it's doing. So then I could go, let's say, frame 80. And depending on the key, yeah, I'm using Bezier, so I can kind of like get this to move around slowly. Okay, I'm going to jump back, play with this a little bit. The whole idea is just wanted to kind of creep up slowly over everything. And the main thing is to make sure it's always touching other objects. And I'm just going to quickly see if I can make this display a bit more friendly. I guess not, unless I drop a different shader on. All right, so anyway, that's just going to give me a basic idea of like, all right, that's touching the wall there. Maybe I want it to be a bit more in the center, so it's touching both walls. But this way we get something like that. All right, so I know this is very bright, but essentially this is moving up, and whatever it's going to touch, it's going to activate. And like I said, I'm not trying to make something that looks super awesome right now. I'm just going through the idea of it instead, okay? Because otherwise I wouldn't animate it that quickly burning up for a start. But once we've done that, let's just focus back on what we're looking at. And the reason I had that, by the way, is because I could now animate this and then send it out as an animatic and say, look, this isn't fire, so don't freak out, but this represents the timing. Is this what you want? And they can say, you know what, it creeps up a little bit too slow. I'd like it to be a bit faster, whatever they want to say. And you're able to do this quickly before you set out any sims, which is going to be the really time consuming part. Okay, like I said, I did that in less than a minute. Now in here, what I might do instead is break this off and instead set up, sorry, what am I doing? Set up a birth, and we'll just set this to all happen at frame 0, and we'll put in about, let's say, 20,000 particles. Link that up, do a position object. 20,000 might be overkill, but we're just going to link that in here. Grayscale, delete particles, just in case we need it. And now when we turn this on, we have all of these particles created. But what I want to do is a group selection. Make the group selection. I can make it an object, or I could make it a volume. And typically, I think a volume is going to be better just because it's going to be faster. But in this example, let's use an object. And by the way, I'm just going to animate that moving up the stairs a bit better. All right. So now I'm just going to split the group. And for me to pipe it in here, which I don't really want to do anyway, but like if I wanted to do that, we can't do it because there's a birth. Okay, these two are going to conflict. So I need to get rid of the birth and get rid of the position, otherwise it's going to reposition it. But I don't want to do that right away anyway. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to have it pipe into a new group, and that's just going to tell me that, okay, this is working. All right. So split group, and the first thing that's going to happen is it does it once, and then because they were already in there when it samples once. So I actually want to say continuous, which means it's going to continue to sample as it moves up. And as you can see, it's a little slow. So I would recommend doing sphere, and it should create, sorry, it should create a group selection. So, okay, if we look over here, we have this group selection sphere, and I'm just going to move it over here. I am doing this quickly, but you should know how to, I'm just using a line. I have hotkeys for a line and like the basic stuff that I use a lot. And just like I have one for parent, so I just hit a button, I can parent something very quickly. All right, and sphere is, as you can see, much quicker because it's not, all it's doing is it's within a volume. You can calculate a volume very quickly, whereas a sphere, it's like an actual polygonal sphere, it's actually got to like figure out the convex boundaries. It's a bit more time consuming and CPU consuming, so that's quicker. I just figured I'd at least point that out. All right, so as we can see, that's activating, looks cool. If it was really critical to get that area there, that's where I might want to scale this up. You know, it just depends what we're doing, and we can get very specific if we need to, but that's kind of like roughly what I'm going for, okay? Actually, I haven't done this, but another way you could do it if you really wanted would be you could create like a spline that connects all the way up the staircase, and you could then run like a loft or something through there, so that way, you know, basically there's an object that would move through this. So I'm just doing this as an example, but you could basically run a loft through this and animate it going up. You know, whatever you wanted to do, but that could be one way if you absolutely wanted to get the whole area. There's lots of different stuff you could do. You could build another particle system, and that particle system spreads up as the activation. You know, there are so many different things, but the whole idea is that I've been able to control getting that to activate very easily. Now, it does feel very linear, and that's kind of the next phase of this is like, well, what if we randomize this a little bit, just to kind of get a bit more interesting kind of thing from it. And also the fact that when these get created, you know, we want them to spawn particles. So right now, if I were to link this in here, what ends up happening is that the particles life, okay, because I just plugged this right in, they're meant to die at age 3. So 1, 2, 3, oh, sorry, there we go, 1, 2, 3. Now, after that, any particle is going to die because it's past its lifespan. So we need to reset the life for a start. Okay, and So just adding to the system, I'm gonna go spawn. Man, I cannot get it. There we go. And spawn and then link in here. Okay. So this isn't very complex, but like we're just basically starting to set up a process where this here is going to be reset age. All right. And all we're doing is we're linking in here because I can get this spawn. I can say delete particle. That's all we're doing. And now what happens is as a particle comes through, it's going to create a new particle with a new age. Okay, and I want to take that a step further now, where, if I duplicate this, I actually want to generate particles before they go through there, because otherwise they're going to die anyway. And so what I'd rather do is have it use the points that go through this group, and those generate new particles. Let me try it here first. So I think originally when I built this, I actually had it plugged in to reset the age and then go through here, but I think that's actually a step we probably don't need. The main thing is just getting this to, whenever it creates new particles, it actually generates them continuously. So these particles are constantly being generated. And then those particles go through the system where they begin to move and generate. So I'm just going to hover on this for a second just to point this out. So first of all, let's just change our displays to lines for both of these, just so we can identify they're the ones moving. Now with these guys, I'm not going to display them at all. And I'm not going to display, or I'll say circles for these. Now, this is just one thing I want to point out, okay? If we want, we can reset the particle age, because there's a few little tricks I want to kind of point out along the way. First of all, if we wanted to delay the start of it, or if we wanted to only emit for a certain amount of time and then they start stopping, these are just a few things I want to go through. So first of all, moving into this group means it's active. Okay, so we can say active, let's say emitter, and we basically pipe it in here right away, so it resets it, and this guy is going to emit particles. We'll make it a low particle count, but plugs in here, and this creates the fire basically. So now what happens is we can see all the fire being generated. I can see there's a lot of points, so like right now, let's create less points. Now we can see that it's just creating a certain amount of points on the wall, and those are generating everything. All right, so let's try and make these just dots. Sorry, dots. But we can see these are generating all of our particles. Now, if, and sorry, I don't know why, but pflow seems to be so sensitive these days. I keep disconnecting stuff by accident. But as we can see here, we've got stuff generating, which works really well. We can randomize some of this stuff. Now, one of the things is initially when it goes into this event, either we can control like randomizing the emission, that sort of thing. Timing wise, there's a few things we can do. One of the main things is, what if I only wanted to burn for 100 frames and then this area starts to die down? I simply can put a delete on here and say delete for, let's say, 10 frames and then die out, because we're resetting the particle age here, okay, by recreating this. And so what happens is we can control the particles burning, doing their thing, and then after a while they can start to fizzle out. And again, we can actually vary that as well. But what you'll notice is that now this should start to emit less and less and less as time goes on and fizzle out, okay? And that's because we reset this, and then we're telling it to die over time. So those sorts of things can be kind of cool if you're specifically wanting to just burn a certain area and then tell it to do less, all right? Now I don't want to do that, but I want to point that out. Same way that like we can see this is kind of constantly pulsing on and off. So if we wanted to vary that as well, I don't need to pipe that in here. Instead, I could just have it reset the particle in the same event and then do an age test in here. And the age test can be randomized. So I could just offset it by 3 and 5. And it just means that now this is going to be a lot more random, because I could see that pulsing before. It's kind of going on, off, on, off. And now this is a lot more organic in terms of what we're getting. Okay. Alright, so all this looks really cool. If we wanted to change these clusters just a little bit, like get them a bit more open, you know, all this kind of stuff we can kind of play with. Actually, let me just push it back a little bit. So, I mean, we do have that control in here if we want to kind of really break it up. So really, I need to zoom out here. You know, but we've got all that control, okay? So all in all, this looks fine. We're able to activate it all. We're able to get it all going based on wherever this object goes. If the object itself is kind of distracting, I can just display it as a box. All right. Now, I don't need to display what's become active. If I want to, I can just see what Fume is going to emit, and that way we're going to get that, okay? And like I said, it's pretty straightforward, but it just means that we've got a system that's going to work really well for giving us specific control. One last thing I totally forgot to do is my particle source. I only set up one of these. I actually want to set up 2. So simplest thing for me to do is just get my source here, duplicate it, remove and add particle flow and choose Fire B. And this guy, I'm going to make it less, and I'm going to also say less heat, so 150. And it just means it's going to more cover the base a little bit. All right, but we've got this set up. Now let's just actually go in and we get rid of Vertex Paint, turn Tessellate off, all of that stuff off. Now we just go to actual mesh. All right, and I'm going to go in here, tessellate everything, add Vertex Paint, and one thing I'm just going to point out right away is that, like, maybe what we're doing doesn't really work so well for going in to every nook and cranny. If that's the case, it's not that hard to just go in. I just want to point all this stuff out. It's pretty obvious, but like, I can go in and just select let's say all of this, and then simply detach that, and then go into the next section and do that. And you know, I just want to point this out. I'm not going to worry about it, but like, if I were to do all this, because I'm like, all right, it makes, you know, it's way easier for me to just do like a wall than to kind of go in to this weird shape and do it all, then, you know, I can just split it all up, paint it all, okay, and then just go into P-Flow and add them all back in here, and it's going to connect them all together again, and we're good to go. So I just want to point that out. If you have like a really intricate mesh, then it's not that difficult just to kind of go in, break it up, do it all, and then add it back in again. All right, so Tessellate, then Vertex Paint, 100% paint bucket, paint, and I'm going to do this very quickly because we get the idea, you know, like, but just going in really quickly, I will just point out a couple of things. So again, doing a lower opacity can be kind of useful here, and I mainly just kind of want to choose get it off. All right, so I just mainly just want to kind of choose, maybe I want it to spread up here, burn across. Fork out a little bit. And the whole idea is just try and keep this fairly organic. And this might be one of those cases that you actually, I might as well do this. Drop a wide angle lens in here. So I won't go too much further than this, but I just figure it's worthwhile kind of touching base a little bit further with it. So yeah, basically just kind of pointing where you want it to burn. So I mean, the key things that I would look for is like, I feel like it's going to creep along the wall quite a lot. It's going to spread out a little bit here. I can kind of get all that stuff in there. I'm not sure why it's kind of being a bit sluggish to what it was earlier. But the main thing is that if I want to paint some areas that are burning up the wall, that sort of thing, that's what I can get in and get going. And I have my original scene file just because I wanted to jump in quickly, and I did this project quite a while ago, and it's just more the idea behind it. But you can see, you know, you can get the idea that I wanted to have like bits creep up the walls, that sort of thing, get that all going. All right, so I feel like that was really important to kind of make sure that it's burning in a pretty chaotic path. It's not very linear. There's splashes, areas that might creep out a little bit, and then they don't really have much to burn with, so they kind of die out, but other areas continue on. And I do think, you know, you could really build a whole procedural system around this. I'd love to actually do this these days in thinking particles, just because I could build more of like a intuitive system where particles, instead of a sphere, move up and activate areas. But once we've done this, once we've got this set up, the next part is that, you know, ideally I want to use a lot of particles. So like at least 10,000 particles. So if I had all these creeping up, it's going to get kind of slow for a start to cache all this out. So I actually used Krakatoa before, but you know, you could just use typical disk caching. And just make sure it's on render. So I might as well go through this really quick. All right, and so the whole idea would be just to quickly cache this out, and you can use caching here. It's not too bad. I do think that Krakatoa is just faster overall. But the whole idea would be just to cache it all, so that way it's real time. And that way at least I can do a preview and we can kind of visualize how it's going to look. So while that's caching, let me just go back to the original, because the whole point of this was that, again, I'm doing this in phases, and you kind of get the idea of that. Initially you have a sphere moving up the staircase, and I can kind of use that to say, okay, I get the basic idea of how this is going to look. And then from there, the next phase is I paint it all. I get to that point where we can visualize and look, okay, I want it to burn here, I want it to burn there. And then over time, once we're at that point, I can then do a disk cache, and that might take 10 minutes to do, but the end result is that I can really see where it's going to be burned, what's going to be burned and what's not. Okay, so before I run any sim, I can look in here and say, you know what, this all looks good. I like the pattern here. You know what, it'd be really cool if we actually added a little bit of fire over here. So let's go do that next. And nothing has been simmed other than caching some particles to disk, which is very quick. But the end result is that I can see exactly where my fire is going to go before I run any sim, and I've got complete control over that. All right, so I'm not going to cache everything out. Like I said, this is more just to kind of point out the process. But as we can see, and this is playing back fine. All right, so as we can see, like whatever I painted, you know, it was only good for minutes. I'd say it's probably going to be like 3 minutes to cache it, but I can see exactly where it's coming on, what it's doing, all that good stuff. The fire that gets driven from this is going to work really well. And the last bit I just want to talk about with this lesson is, how do you do it all? Like, do you just make a big grid? I tend to work with one grid, initially do all the look dev, and then I actually just duplicate them because I don't like NSIM. So I'll usually just build grids, and I make sure there's an overlap. So there's this overlap here between the next grid. Okay, so bit by bit, I'm working my way up here, duplicating grids the whole time, and they'll connect together and work really well by doing that. So I want to try and go through this as quick as I can. Coincidentally, the studio I did this project for, I'm about to go meet for a beer. So as you can see, I'm using multiple grids, and the reason for that is we can look. I cranked the detail fairly high for fire that's that far away. I think this is a good resolution, and we can see that there's overlap. Okay, basically there's this grid. I'll make this really big and ugly. There's this grid, and then this grid are connected together. And I wanted that because I wanted to have fire filling up this area. But more importantly, I wanted there to be enough overlap that this one wouldn't hit this negative space. Sorry, this more positive space. It would never hit the edge, basically, because it's already emitting into the new one here as well. All right, so I do this all the time for a lot of what I'm doing, and I just figure it works well. And the thing is, I can fire this out into several nodes. So we have like 5 grids simming at once rather than doing one big grid or anything like that. Because again, for me, the faster I can get iterations out, the quicker I can see results, the quicker I can turn things around and get them out. So that way I can buy myself time back to put into other shots rather than sitting there waiting for a big sim, make a revision. I want to try and get things as accurate as I can, so that way I can usually final things in version 2, or in this case, version 3 was when I finaled it. All right, so first sim is just my test. Go to version 2. Version 2 is what I actually do a proper thing like this, and then version 3 would be the final. And like I said, this system, is just a really basic setup, but I managed to knock out a bunch of shots in very, very little amount of time, and each one was 1,000 frames. And I wanted to limit the amount I redid it. So the more I could see quickly how this was all going to work, and I could actually send out this to the client, and the director could come back and say, change this, fix this. There is some areas that are a little bit linear, and the way I would fix that is exactly what we did a minute ago, well, last part of the lesson, but like setting up a noise and then putting the Vertex Color inside of that. And again, I'm just kind of going through the theory of this, but like if I had a noise, it's going to end up breaking the pattern up like this. So you might have like a noisy pattern over everything in the scene, and then what's going to happen is, as this activates, it's never going to activate in a linear fashion like this, but instead it's going to activate in a little bit of a sub fork as well. So it'll break up any kind of linear pattern you have, and instead it'll kind of like break it up like that. So that's the sort of thing that I just want to kind of mention, is that you could add that to the texture that you're emitting from, so that way it's actually broken up more. There's a lot you can do with this, and like I said, I'd probably prefer to use TP and actually set up a system that procedurally activates as it goes, and it's just a bit better than having a sphere, you know what I mean? And all of this, you could actually drive it all from shaders, you could do a lot, but that's the basic setup here. And I know I have rushed through it, but this is just something that I want to communicate the basic idea, because I actually have a lot of like really good examples of doing big fire, and this isn't about that. I wanted to quickly build fire in the first part of the lesson. Second part, I wanted to show how we can paint where we want the fire to go, and then animate a sphere that will activate it all, and then cache it all out so I've got a visual preview that I can work from. Okay, and then I can see what it's going to do, hit a button, everything sims, and we're good to go. And I can sim it once rather than having to sim it multiple times because I've got to play with it all. And the thing is, the fire is all locked down. I've locked down the look of it ahead of time. I know what it's going to look like. Now I'm controlling the shapes that the fire is going to burn from. And lastly, using multiple grids and just making them intersect. I'm not using NSIM or anything. And it means I can fire several nodes out to the farm, keep these tight and therefore more high res by concentrating on certain areas. So that way, rather than a big grid or any weird stuff going on. I got several grids. I get the result that I want. All of these, if I were to look at them, I assume I still have caches. I mightn't. Yeah, I think I blasted the caches because it's 1,000 frames and there's about 4 or 5 in any given scene. But yeah, it all works. Like the end result is what we saw. So now that we've gone through this process, I hope it's given you a bit more insight into ways to really think and plan ahead with your effects. Rather than diving in, doing some setup work beforehand will allow for more control in the long run and avoid many mistakes and pitfalls we run into. So I hope you found this information valuable, and if you want to get access to a few of the high-value free visual effects crash courses that are available on my website, simply go to allanmckay.com and you'll be able to get access to more high-end visual effects training, as well as guides, assets, additional videos, and more. If you can take a moment to like and, more importantly, leave a comment below. I try to respond and answer any questions, comments, things like that, as well as if you have suggestions on additional videos that you want, because more importantly, I want to be able to serve you and give you as much value as I can. Lastly, if you get a chance to subscribe, you can get notifications about this training as it comes available. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll be sending these videos out to you next Friday, the 17th of June.